The title of my talk today is How Crypto Can Regenerate the World. I am Kevin Owocki, formerly of Gitcoin. I don't know if you've heard, but I've disaffiliated from Gitcoin. And now I'm building a regen venture studio called SuperModular that builds regenerative dApps, sometimes on top of Gitcoin's new grant stack and Allo protocol, and sometimes on top of hypercerts and other primitives in the space. So how many people in the audience have heard of Gitcoin grants? All right. You on your phone over there, have you heard of Gitcoin grants? All right. Just trolling the people who aren't paying attention. Hey, have you heard of Gitcoin grants before? Yes, all right. A little crowd engagement, got that out of the way. So I wrote this post a little while ago on the Gitcoin Gov forum called A Vision for a Pluralistic Civilizational Scale Infrastructure for Funding Public Goods. And it was like 10 pages long, and I've been told that people haven't read it, so we're putting it into video form and putting lots of shiny objects on the screen so that people will actually pay attention to it. So pluralism, civilizational scale, infrastructure for coordinating and funding public goods. So how do we scale what we're doing to the world? So we're going to start off by talking about the target, and then we're going to talk about coordination at scale and then doing it right, and that will be pretty much the talk. So how crypto can regenerate the world. Please do not put on a panel entitled How Crypto is Regenerating the World. It makes me cringe so much to hear that people think that it is happening now. Ponzi schemes, pump and dump, centralized exchanges rugging you. Thanks, John. Yeah, this motherfucker, Sam Bankman-Fried. It's not regenerating the world yet. This is a roadmap to get to that world. So my big question is, how do we rotate capital, attention, resources from the degenerative projects to the regenerative projects, the most important resources in the space? How do we get them to go from working on pump and dumps and bigger casinos to things that are actually exporting good for the world and helping everyday citizens pay their mortgage by working on public goods? That's how we solve the incentive alignment problem. Kevin, what's a regenerative project? I'm so glad you asked. Degenerative projects go down over time in resource capacity. Regenerative projects number go up over time. And there's also an element of what happens when these projects hit fragility. If you are over-leveraged in the decentralized casino, then you are too fragile. How do we build an anti-fragile public goods funding infrastructure that becomes stronger over time when it hits a shock event? So regen number goes up, degen number goes down over the long term, okay? And I think it's important to say that I'm not just talking about money here. I'm talking about spiritual capital, intellectual capital, cultural capital, material capital. Those are the types of resources that we want to see regenerating over time. And if you project where we are now at ETHDenver into the future, that's what the x-axis is right here. If our projected path is a degenerative pump and dump Ponzi scheme economy that Gary Gensler needs to overregulate, then why don't we pull the future into a plausible or possible future? Even if it's preposterous, let's put resources towards pulling us towards a more regenerative economy. By the way, if Gary Gensler is listening out here, a regenerative crypto-economic economy is one that self-regulates from the smart contracts. It's anti-fragile and resource number go up over time. I think that if we can self-regulate, then that's one way of saying it, but if we can have crypto regenerating the world, if it's a positive-sum game, then there's no need to have regulators on top of us. So yeah, thank you. Yeah. If you know Gary, tell him that we're regenerating stuff with crypto. How do we solve coordination failures? Our nation-state infrastructure, industrial age infrastructure, solving national public goods. How do we solve global coordination failures? Things like climate change, biodiversity collapse, AI alignment, the surveillance tech economy, open source funding. I think of these things as, I've been working with this philosopher and thinker named Daniel Schmachtenberger, who calls these things the meta-crisis. The sum of all the coordination failures is the meta-crisis. So if you look at this graph of, if the x-axis is how coordinated are we, and the y-axis is how much control do we need to give governments The first attractor of human behavior is coordination failure. We are uncoordinated, and so we have things like AI alignment issues and climate change and biodiversity collapse. And so the natural response to that is, let's regulate it. Let's bring it under the realm of the state, and let's regulate it. And that's how you get the second attractor of human behavior, which is dystopias. Once you give someone the ability to regulate over top of you, then how do you know that they're not going to just steal your land, plunder your resources, things like that? So our target is to build a third attractor where we are both coordinated, but we don't need to give a bunch of governance control to people who could abuse it. I think that that's what crypto can do for the world, and that is why I think Web3 is well positioned to regenerate the world. All right. So how do we do it? We're well positioned to do it. A little building block for this talk, I've been starting to think about these things called holons, something that is simultaneously a whole and of itself part of a larger whole. So me as a human, I have one holon, in that I am a bunch of cells and organs that make up Kevin Owocki. And then us as a group are the holon that is this presentation about how crypto could regenerate the world. And then there's ETHDenver, and then there's Denver, and then there's Colorado, and then there's the United States, and then there's the world. Those aren't all the holons, but those are just a stack of where we are now. Okay, and that's what's called a holarchy, a connection between holons, where a holon is both a part and a whole. So basically, you can do this with like family kins all the way up to the state, and then you can do this from cells and organs all the way up to the biosphere. It's all holons everywhere around us. So TLDR, I've been having a lot of conversations about individualism and collectivism, and one of the things that I think is cool about holons and holarchies is that it breaks the duality of individual versus collectivism, because at a different level, we are all a collective, but also an individual. So let's break that duality. Okay, so how do we coordinate? Little basic coordination preamble here. Prisoner's dilemma, a game theoretical idea that if you have two prisoners who have been accused of a crime and they're separated from each other and given a plea bargain where if they rat on the other, they get a better outcome. But if they coordinate together, then they'll each get a reduced sentence. And game theoretically, if these people don't coordinate, if they're gonna, the Nash equilibrium, which is the coordination Schelling point where most people go, is without coordination, they'll defect on each other and they'll all get more of a sentence. And if they cooperate, but if they do coordinate, they'll cooperate. They could pass messages back and forth. If they can coordinate, then they're going to get a better outcome. Now, this sounds like a silly example, but when you think about things like climate change, when we're all flying out to ETHDenver and we're all expending a little bit of carbon to get here, then I think it's pretty clear that we don't have the right coordination infrastructure for the world. So you can take prisoner's dilemma and you can attach it to a bunch of different areas of a holon where individuals are not coordinating, even though their outcome would be better if they did. I think Web3 is a better coordination power tool. Our legacy institutions for supporting public goods are often opaque, unaccountable, inefficient, and centralized with high administrative overheads. There are CEOs of NGOs and nonprofits that make $30 million per year, and they're just extracting from the markets that they serve. What if we could build transparent, uncorruptible, programmable, and permissionless coordination systems that are worldwide, and we can solve some of these coordination mechanisms? So let's bring this and assimilate this information with the Holonic architecture that I have set for this talk. If you look at this holon, how does this individual interact with the whole? Well, if they're going to fund public goods, which is a coordination failure, funding public goods is a coordination game, then I think that we can break into each holon. What are the mechanisms through which they're raising money to fund public goods, and what are the distribution mechanisms where the people who are providing value are able to get rewards for doing that legitimately? So the end state of this is that if you're in this holon, then you can be fixing potholes or funding open source, AI alignment, and you can pay your mortgage and support your family instead of having to go work on private goods, go work at Chase Bank in order to support your family. We can stack a pluralism of coordination mechanisms inside of these holons, and different coordination mechanisms can do different things for the holon. In the holon, the Ethereum ecosystem, we have multiple public goods funding. I am most closely associated with Gitcoin. I don't know if you know this, but I've disaffiliated from Gitcoin recently. and I'm no longer leading anything there. The DAO's in charge of it. But there's a pluralism of coordination mechanisms in the Ethereum ecosystem. Really excited about optimism, retroactive public goods funding, DAO drop, retroactive public goods funding, Gitcoin and CLR fund do quadratic funding, and giveth is a grab bag of all the different mechanisms. So the pluralism not only creates capture resistance within the ecosystem. I don't know if we can fix the problem with my mic or if I can get a different mic. That'd be great. I think the battery might be dying or something. All right, this is anti-fragility. There's probably a mic. Second. Okay. Wow, thank you. Okay, so when we've got multiple ways for me to speak to you, that creates anti-fragility. Yeah. Oh man, I can work my way through something like that, but I can't vamp for 20 minutes. So Griff, you're an all-star. Anyway, the plurality creates capture resistance. It creates anti-fragility. It creates that shock resistance. I don't know how much time I have. It says 6 minutes, but I started early. I'd love to go for like 5 more minutes over the timer if you're in the AV booth. All right, coordination at scale. So we've established that we are at the intersection of all these different holons. Gitcoin DAO, Shelling Point, Ethereum ecosystem. You are here. We're at ETHDenver in the Ethereum ecosystem. That's Owocki. That's all of you. Made a holon for each of you in the audience. And if you think about how we scale, okay, so now we've got the Holonic scaffold to civilizational scale public goods funding. And if you look at the people in the family and the community that we've got here, and you start to think about the coordination failures that exist at all these different levels of the holons. Cancer and runaway growth within your body is a coordination failure at the cellular level. Crime is a coordination failure at the citywide level. Climate change is a coordination failure at the holonic planetary level. I still have 6 minutes on the clock. Would love to get 5 minutes more if possible, since I started 5 minutes early. Cool, thank you. I hope that means yes. Okay, a shrug. All right, I'll go move faster. Digital public goods. So basically, these are all the digital holons that you're in. The open source software right up there that you're with is not well funded, and that's a coordination failure. The fact that the DAOs that you're in can't decide their governance problems is a coordination failure. One of the things I think is really cool about the Ethereum ecosystem, having open source forkable codes, mechanisms that are funding public goods in these ecosystems, is that we can cross-pollination between mechanisms and money between these two different types of holons. Our digital public goods funding infrastructure is ecosystem growth tools like Gitcoin grants, Allo protocol, retroactive public goods funding. And what if we transposed those? The coin market cap of crypto is $1 trillion right now, or at least it was when I wrote this talk. And geographic-based public goods funding, my friend Griff Green over here has told me that there's $10 trillion per year that governments and nonprofits are giving to public goods. What if we could capture some of that capital that's being inefficiently allocated through those other holons? Oh, by the way, we did a quadratic funding experiment in downtown Boulder and delivered funds to downtown Boulder businesses that have been affected by the pandemic. And quadratic funding works in the mainstream, which I think is just so cool. Thank you to Brad Feld and Vitalik Buterin for funding the matching pool for this. It was a lot of fun. Okay, so that's coordination at scale. That's how we take what we're doing right now and holonically scale it out to all the complexity of what we're doing out there. So how do we do it right? How do we not F it up? I'm really excited about this idea of plurality. I never put this much text on a slide, but I'm just really excited by this quote from Gene Roddenberry, the creator of Star Trek. Concord, as much as discord, requires the presence of at least two different notes. The brotherhood of man and woman is the ideal basis on learning to delight on our essential differences, to learning to recognize our similarity. The circle and the triangle combine to produce a gemstone in the center of the union of words that creates music and song. The union of marriage creates children. I just get the little special tingle when I think about plurality, which is an argument for diversity from first principles. So let's build a pluralistic public goods funding infrastructure. Let's build for cooperation across social distance. As cooperation across social distance just means that, like, if you and I aren't in the same tribe, then we're still going to coordinate with each other. You know, the Gitcoin DAO has a coordination mechanism, but how is Gitcoin DAO interacting with Optimism and Giveth and the rest of the Ethereum ecosystem? Let's build coordination across social distance and avoid low cooperation across social distance tribal echo chambers. Let's build a civilizational scale public goods infrastructure that is all about fully forkable and modular open source code, about localism. So basically, the individual has to rely on the local government, has to rely on the state, only in the federal, only when necessary. This is what the FANG and the Web 2 companies really fucked up. They're just all lording over all of us with their surveillance capitalism at every Holon level and exporting value to their shareholders by driving an attention economy that just extracts our attention and extracts our capital. All right. Let's work around the first principles game theory that we already know about. Donut economics, Eleanor Ostrom's 8 principles for managing a commons. Let's build for economies of scale. So basically, impact DAOs that all benefit from each other. One of the coolest things about Gitcoin Grants 1.0 was that when a grant was in multiple matching pools, it would get like a $1 contribution would equal $100 from one matching pool and $500 from another matching pool. Coin Center was in like 3 different matching pools, and a $1 contribution to Coin Center a few rounds ago would be equal to $1,000 worth of funding for crypto advocacy. And so these economies of scale of the stackability of this stuff, I think, is really, 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 really cool. And it was so good that, like, the Bitcoin maxis accused Gitcoin of being a Ponzi scheme because they didn't understand how quadratic funding works. And I still haven't been able to explain it to them, but maybe when we do quadratic funding for Bitcoin and we export across cooperation across social distance, an ability for them to fund their own ecosystem, they will finally get it. Probably not then, but when they see the matching pool, they'll or the multiplier, they will. Little dig at Bitcoin maxis because I know my audience here at ETHDenver. Economies of scale. So how can the global design pools and platforms support the local scale and vice versa? Collective intelligence. A lot of you may not know this about Gitcoin Grants, but it's not just a fundraising mechanism. It's actually a signal aggregation mechanism for the Ethereum community to see what is the next important thing for the Ethereum community. This is a graph of Gitcoin Grants round 11, where each node in the network is a contributor and each edge is a contribution. We are building a mesh network of signal aggregation to figure out which public goods we actually care about. And by the way, we're doing it way faster, cheaper, and better than a government ever could do. Gitcoin Grants is signal aggregation for the mechanism, and I think that, you know, when VCs look for deal flow and the Ethereum Foundation looks for which grants they're going to fund, they can use Gitcoin as a signal aggregation mechanism. They can also use the other mechanisms for doing it. Okay, this one's heady, but stay with me because it's really dense once you get over or fun when you get over the learning curve. What if we build an evolutionary tree of the Web3 ecosystem? I don't know if you've ever seen an evolutionary tree in nature, where single-cell organisms become multicellular organisms, become mammals. But I think that the crypto ecosystem, it started with the Byzantine generals problem being solved. And then from 2008 to present, we have a cycle of bull and bear cycle of bear markets in which we have the Bitcoin ecosystem. And by the way, have like Mt. Gox, which is an extinction event in that ecosystem. And then we have BTC forks and ETH, and we have early DAOs and ICOs, and there's like another extinction event because anyone in the audience still use Dentacoin? Not a single hand is using Dentacoin? Shit. All right. Wallets, DeFi, alt layer 1s, bridges, ETH layer 2s, NFTs. There is an evolutionary approach to this space where we're using market selection instead of natural selection to select what the capital and attention and talent and resources is going to. As David in the audience, hello. As David Hoffman in the audience would say, third microphone, anti-fragility, plurality, etc. David Hoffman would say, what's the next meta? And at one point, I'm gonna convince you that regen is the next meta at some point as we rotate capital and attention and talent into the next market cycle. Each bull market is a Cambrian explosion of talent of new projects, and each bear market is an extinction event. But the projects that make it through each cycle are the keystone species, the species that all the other things rely on for support. And so how do we build keystone species that are regenerative and rotate capital and talent into Web3? All right, growth into web scale. So we're going to build this Holonic infrastructure for funding and coordinating public goods. Right now, there's just a little regen dot in the middle of the ecosystem. But as people figure out that coordination is the new meta, David Hoffman, we are going to reach an end state in which we are coordinating around our Holonic public goods. Because in the early stage, the meta for these Ethereum DAO ecosystems is coordinating their own attention and capital. We bootstrap the mechanisms, we build the muscle, and then we bring it to web scale for the entire civilization to fund their public goods. We siphon off money from governments that are doing it with high administrative overhead, and we bring all this to web scale. And by the way, Gary Gensler keeps his hands off of it because it's regenerative the whole way up and down. Okay, there we go. I'm also inspired, I don't know if Simona Pop is here, but biomimicry is one of her memes. And like, what's the idea that like as a forest grows, then the root system gets more and more complex as we interoperate with each other. The people who are building the mycelial networks of these things are the ones who are building the networks that I just think are really cool. They're gonna be the one, that's how nature coordinates with mycelial networks, the roots underground that channel resources to each other. We are building the infrastructure for the mycelial network of Web3 right here. Oh my gosh, we're already at the end, and I'm only a couple minutes over. All right, so if you haven't read this post, hopefully now people understand my vision, at least for a pluralistic civilizational scale, for funding public goods, how crypto can regenerate the world. How do we rotate capital, attention, and resources to regenerative projects? How do we make regeneration the new meta is the open question that I will leave to you. How do we move from a projected future that is degenerative into a plausible or possible adjacent future in which crypto is regenerating the world? And Finn.